The clatter of horses' hooves echoed through the dusty street of Redemption Creek as Madeline Hayes stared in disbelief at the horror unfolding before her. Her wrists burned from the course rope binding them, dirt smudging her once pristine blue dress, as she and 5 other women were forcibly marched toward the weathered auction platform at the edge of town. The year was 1876, and the West was still wild enough for men to believe they could trade in human lives without consequence. Madeline had arrived in Colorado Territory just 3 days prior, answering an advertisement for schoolteachers, only to find herself drugged at dinner and awakening to captivity. Now she stood alongside other women, some weeping, some stoic with shock as their captors prepared to sell them to the highest bidders. "Keep moving," barked a rail-thin man with rotting teeth, yanking the rope that bound them all together. These fine gentlemen paid good money to arrange this private auction, and they're eager to see the merchandise. Through the haze of fear, Madeline noticed a tall figure watching from the shadows of the livery stable. The man's face was partially obscured by his wide-brimmed hat, but something in his stance, a coiled tension, caught her attention. His hand rested near the holster at his hip, and even from a distance, she could see his jaw tighten. The auction master climbed the wooden platform and raised his arms to the crowd of 15 or so men gathered around. "Gentlemen, today we have some prime selections for your ranches, homes, or private establishments." His voice dripped with insinuation, causing uncomfortable laughter to ripple through the crowd. Before the first woman could be dragged up the steps, the stranger from the shadows stepped into the street. Sunlight glinted off his sheriff's badge as he positioned himself between the auction platform and the bound women. The women were being dragged to the auction, the cowboy said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "Not today, not ever again." Madeline recognized the unmistakable click of a revolver being cocked, and she saw the man's companions emerging from various positions around the square, 3 deputies with rifles ready. "This is a legal business arrangement, Sheriff Lawson," the auctioneer protested, though his voice wavered. These women signed contracts. The sheriff, tall and broad-shouldered with dark blonde hair visible beneath his hat, stepped closer. "The name's Sheriff Brock Lawson, and I don't see any willing participants here. I see kidnapped women and a gang of criminals about to face justice." His voice was steady, but Madeline could hear the controlled fury beneath each word. What happened next unfolded in a blur. One of the traffickers reached for his gun, and shots exploded across the square. Madeline dropped to the ground, dragging the other women with her as bullets whizzed overhead. When she dared to look up again, 3 of the traffickers lay wounded in the dirt, and the others had thrown up their hands. Sheriff Lawson strode forward, cutting the ropes that bound the women with a single slice of his knife. When he reached Madeline, their eyes met briefly. His were startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin. "You're safe now, miss," he said quietly, helping her to her feet. "I promise you that." Something in his gentle touch, so at odds with his formidable presence moments before, made Madeline believe him despite everything. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from fear and thirst. "My name is Madeline Hayes, Miss Hayes," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Let's get you and the others somewhere safe." As the deputies led the traffickers away, Sheriff Lawson escorted the women to the town's small hotel, arranging rooms and sending for the doctor. Redemption Creek might have been a rough frontier town, but Madeline soon discovered it had a core of decent folks who were horrified by what had nearly transpired. Later that evening, as Madeline sat in the hotel's small dining room sipping tea with trembling hands, Sheriff Lawson approached her table. "May I join you, Miss Hayes?" he asked, removing his hat to reveal thick sandy blonde hair. "Please," she said, gesturing to the empty chair. Up close, she could see lines around his eyes, not from age, for he couldn't have been more than 30, but from squinting against the harsh western sun. "I owe you my life, Sheriff," she said once he was seated. "No one owes me anything for doing what's right," he replied. "But I am curious how you came to be in such a situation." Madeline explained about the teaching advertisement that had brought her from Philadelphia after the death of her parents left her with few prospects back east. Seems they've been running this scheme across several territories, Brock said grimly. Luring educated women out here with false promises, then selling them to mining camps and worse. What will happen to the others? She asked, thinking of the 5 women who'd shared her ordeal. 2 have family we've contacted. The others will stay until we can arrange safe passage wherever they wish to go. He paused. And you, Miss Hayes, what are your plans now? Madeline stared into her teacup, reality settling heavily on her shoulders. I have no family, little money, and now no position. I suppose I'll have to find work here until I can save enough to return east. Actually, Brock said, Redemption Creek still needs a teacher. The advertisement was real enough, it was how they lured you here. But our town council had nothing to do with those men. The schoolhouse has been sitting empty since Miss Winters left to get married last spring. Hope fluttered in Madeline's chest. You mean there actually is a teaching position, if you're interested. For the first time, a slight smile curved his lips. Though I understand if you're eager to leave this place after what happened. Madeline considered his words carefully. She'd dreamed of adventure in coming west, though certainly not the kind she'd experienced thus far. But something about this town and perhaps its sheriff made her hesitate to flee. I would like to see the schoolhouse, she said finally, before making any decisions. I'll take you there tomorrow, Brock offered, rising from his chair. Get some rest, Miss Hayes. You're safe in Redemption Creek now. As he walked away, Madeline couldn't help but notice the way other patrons nodded respectfully to him. She'd come west seeking independence and purpose. Perhaps she might find both here, under the protection of a sheriff who'd risked his life for strangers. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of crystalline blue sky that seemed to exist only in the Western Territories. Madeline dressed in her second-best dress, thankful that her trunk had been recovered from the traffickers' camp. When she descended to the hotel lobby, Sheriff Lawson was waiting, hat in hand. Good morning, Miss Hayes, he greeted her. I hope you slept well. As well as could be expected, she admitted. The nightmares had been vivid, but the knowledge of thick walls and locked doors had eventually allowed her some rest. They walked side by side down the main street of Redemption Creek. In the morning light, Madeline took proper notice of the town for the first time. It was larger than she'd initially thought. A general store, bank, telegraph office, and several other businesses lined the street. People nodded at the sheriff as they passed, many offering curious but not unkind glances at Madeline. How long have you been sheriff here? She asked, noting how comfortably he wore both the badge and the authority it represented. Going on 5 years now, Brock replied. Came here after the war looking for someplace quieter than Texas. Was it? Quieter, I mean. A wry smile crossed his face. Not especially, but it became home anyway. They reached a small whitewashed building set back from the main road. A bell hung from a post outside and a neat yard surrounded the structure. This is it, Brock said, pushing open the gate. Our schoolhouse. Inside was a simple room with rows of benches, a teacher's desk at the front, and a blackboard covering most of the wall. Shelves held a modest collection of books, and large windows let in ample light. It's not much compared to Eastern schools, I imagine, Brock said, watching her reaction carefully. Madeline walked slowly to the front of the room, running her fingers along the smooth wooden desk. How many children would I be teaching? 23 at last count, ages 6 to 16. Ranchers' children, shopkeepers' kids, a few from the mining families. He hesitated. Including 2 Ute children and 3 Mexican children. Some folks here had objections to that arrangement, but I believe education shouldn't be limited by such things. Madeline turned to him with newfound respect. I couldn't agree more, Sheriff. Something passed between them, then an understanding, a recognition of shared values that surprised them both. The position pays $30 a month, plus room and board at Mrs. Tillman's boarding house, Brock continued, breaking the moment. Town council meets tonight. I can introduce you if you're interested. Madeline took another look around the schoolroom, imagining it filled with children eager to learn. Despite everything that had happened, something about this place called to her. I would like to meet them, she decided. And if we can come to terms, I'd like to stay. Brock's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I was hoping you'd say that. The town council, consisting of the mayor, the owner of the general store, a rancher, and the town doctor, interviewed Madeline that evening in the back room of the town hall. Brock stood near the door, silent but supportive, as she described her education and teaching experience in Philadelphia. "Well, Miss Hayes," Mayor Winston said when she'd finished, "your credentials are impressive, but I must ask, after your unfortunate experience upon arrival, are you certain you wish to remain in Redemption Creek?" Madeline straightened her shoulders. "What happened to me was terrible, but it was not the doing of this town. I've always believed in judging people by their actions, not by circumstances. And from what I've seen, the people of Redemption Creek acted honorably when it mattered." She glanced briefly at Brock, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. "Besides," she added, 23 children need a teacher. I need employment. It seems a fortuitous arrangement for us all." The council members exchanged looks, then the mayor smiled. "Well said, Miss Hayes. The position is yours if you want it. School term begins in 2 weeks." After arranging the details of her employment, Madeline found herself walking back to the hotel beside Sheriff Lawson in the cool evening air. "Thank you for your support, Sheriff," she said. "I might not have had this opportunity without your intervention. I have a feeling you would have found your way regardless, Miss Hayes. You strike me as a determined woman. Please call me Madeline. After all we've been through," Miss Hayes seems unnecessarily formal. He tipped his hat slightly. "Madeline, then, and I'm Brock to my friends. Am I to count myself among them, then?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. "I certainly hope so." His voice was warm in the gathering darkness. They reached the hotel, and Brock paused at the bottom of the steps. "Tomorrow I'll introduce you to Mrs. Tillman. She's a fine woman, lost her husband in the war. She'll help you get settled before school begins." "I look forward to it." Madeline hesitated, then extended her hand. "Good night, Brock." His large hand enveloped hers gently. "Good night, Madeline. Sleep well." As she watched him walk away down the darkening street, Madeline realized her life had changed irrevocably in ways she could never have imagined when she boarded that train in Philadelphia. Whether for better or worse remained to be seen, but for the first time since her parents' deaths, she felt something like hope stirring in her heart. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity as Madeline settled into life in Redemption Creek. Mrs. Tillman's boarding house proved to be a comfortable haven. Her room was small but clean, with a window overlooking a garden that the older woman tended with devotion. The widow took Madeline under her wing, introducing her to the respectable women of the town and helping her navigate the unwritten social rules of frontier society. Madeline spent her days preparing the schoolhouse, reviewing the available textbooks, and developing lesson plans. To her surprise, Brock often appeared during these preparations, sometimes bearing a book he thought might be useful or simply offering to move the heavier furniture. "Sheriff Lawson, I don't recall you showing this much interest in education when Miss Winters was teaching," Mrs. Tillman remarked one evening at dinner, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Brock's ears reddened slightly. "Just trying to make our new teacher feel welcome, Mrs. Tillman." "Indeed." The widow shared a knowing glance with Madeline, who felt her own cheeks grow warm. Despite the teasing, Madeline found herself looking forward to Brock's visits. Unlike many men she'd known, he listened when she spoke and valued her opinions. Their conversations ranged from books they'd both read to their differing perspectives on Western expansion. "The government makes promises to the native tribes, then breaks them whenever gold or land becomes desirable," Brock said one afternoon as they sat on the schoolhouse steps, taking a break from arranging desks. "I've seen it happen too many times. Yet you enforce the law," Madeline observed. "I try to enforce justice," he corrected. "Sometimes they're the same thing, often they're not." It was this thoughtfulness, this complexity beneath his capable exterior that increasingly drew Madeline to him. The day before school was to begin, Brock invited her to ride out to see some of the countryside. "Many of your students live on ranches and farms outside town. Might be good for you to get your bearings." They rode side by side on horses borrowed from the livery stable, Madeline managing admirably despite her limited experience. The landscape opened before them, rolling hills giving way to dramatic mountains in the distance. meadows bursting with late summer wildflowers. "It's breathtaking," she said as they paused on a ridge overlooking a river valley. "In Philadelphia, one rarely sees beyond the next block of buildings. That's why I could never go back east," Brock admitted. "After seeing this, walls feel too confining." They dismounted to let the horses rest, sitting on a fallen log. In the distance, a herd of pronghorn antelope grazed peacefully. "May I ask you something personal?" Madeline ventured. "You can ask, I might not answer." But his smile took any sting from the words. "What brought you to law enforcement? You seem different from other lawmen I've encountered." Brock was quiet for so long that Madeline thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was reflective. "I fought for the Union in the war, saw too much death, too much chaos. Afterward, I drifted, taking work where I could find it." He looked out over the valley. "One night in a Kansas town, I witnessed a man being beaten nearly to death while bystanders did nothing. Something broke in me. I pulled my gun, stopped it, helped the victim to a doctor." He turned to face her. "The local sheriff offered me a deputy position the next day, said men willing to act when others stand by are rare. I realized then that I could use what the war taught me for something better than killing." Madeline was moved by his candor. "The women at the auction, you could have waited for more deputies, less risk. Some risks are worth taking." His eyes held her steadily. "Some people are worth saving." The intensity of his gaze made her heart quicken. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her hand, but the moment passed when a falcon cried overhead, drawing their attention skyward. "We should head back," Brock said, rising and offering his hand to help her up. "Big day for you tomorrow." As they rode back to town, Madeline reflected on how comfortable she felt in his presence, a feeling both unfamiliar and increasingly precious. The first day of school brought 18 nervous children, 5 being kept home to help with harvesting, and 1 equally nervous teacher to the schoolhouse. Madeline stood at the door, greeting each child by name, having memorized the roster Mrs. Tillman had provided. By midday, she had conducted assessments, organized the children by ability rather than strictly by age, and begun establishing the routines that would structure their days together. When she rang the bell for lunch, she was pleased with their progress, but exhausted by the effort of managing so many different levels of learning. Stepping outside for a breath of air, she was surprised to see Brock leaning against a tree in the yard, watching the children play. "Checking for lawbreakers, Sheriff," she called, walking over to join him. "Just making sure our newest citizen is settling in properly," he replied. "How goes the battle?" "They're good children," she said. "Eager to learn, most of them. A few will need extra attention." "Like young Tim Hollister. I noticed him testing your patience this morning." Madeline laughed. "You were watching that long. Yes, Tim has energy to spare. I'll need to channel it constructively. His father's the same way, restless soul." Brock pushed away from the tree. "I won't keep you from your duties, teacher. Just wanted to see how your first day was progressing." "I appreciate the concern," she said sincerely. "Will you join me for supper at the hotel restaurant tonight?" he asked suddenly, "to celebrate your successful debut." The invitation surprised and pleased her. "I'd like that very much." That evening was the first of many they would spend together in the coming weeks. As autumn painted the aspen trees gold and crimson, Madeline settled into her role as Redemption Creek's teacher, earning the respect of parents and the devotion of most of her students. She found unexpected fulfillment in watching children discover new ideas, in helping them connect letters into words, words into dreams. And increasingly, she found herself looking forward to the moments she shared with Brock's Sunday afternoon rides into the countryside, Tuesday evening discussions at the small town library, or simply crossing paths on the street as they went about their duties. Yet shadows occasionally darkened these golden days. Twice, Brock was called away to pursue criminals, returning once with a bullet graze on his arm that he dismissed as barely a scratch. The reality of his dangerous profession weighed on Madeline more than she cared to admit. Then came the November night that changed everything between them. Madeline was grading arithmetic papers by lamplight when frantic knocking sounded at her door. She opened it to find Lucy, one of her older students, white-faced with panic. "Miss Hayes, please come quick." Sheriff Lawson's been hurt bad, they just brought him to Doc Miller's. Grabbing her shawl, Madeline rushed through the cold night air to the doctor's office at the edge of town. Inside, she found Chaos the doctor shouting for clean bandages, his wife heating water, and on the examination table, Brock lying pale and still, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his side. "What happened?" she gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. "Ambushed," growled Deputy Collins. "Gang we've been tracking decided to track us instead. Sheriff took a bullet meant for me." Dr. Miller looked up briefly. "Miss Hayes, unless you can assist, please wait outside. I need to remove this bullet immediately." "I can assist," she said firmly, removing her shawl and rolling up her sleeves. "My father was a physician. I helped him many times." The doctor assessed her for a moment, then nodded curtly. "Wash your hands thoroughly. Mrs. Miller will show you." For the next hour, Madeline worked alongside the doctor, passing instruments, applying pressure to stem bleeding, and whispering encouragements to Brock when his eyes occasionally fluttered open. When the bullet was finally extracted and the wound cleaned and stitched, she helped wash the blood from his skin with gentle, trembling hands. "He's strong," Dr. Miller said when they had finished. "The bullet missed anything vital. With rest and care, he'll recover." "I'll stay with him tonight," Madeline said, her tone allowing no argument. "As you wish. Call me if his condition changes." The doctor looked at her knowingly. "You care deeply for him." It wasn't a question, so Madeline didn't answer. But as she sat beside Brock's bed through the long night, holding his hand and watching each breath, she confronted the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. Somewhere between that terrible day at the auction and this moment, she had fallen in love with this complicated, honorable man. Near dawn, Brock stirred, his eyes opening to find her keeping vigil. "Madeline," he whispered hoarsely, "you're here." "Where else would I be?" she asked, squeezing his hand. "You've been crying." His fingers weakly touched her cheek where tears had left their tracks. "You frightened me," she admitted, "when I saw you lying there." "I'm harder to kill than that," he murmured, attempting a smile. "Don't joke," she said sharply. "I thought I might lose you before." She stopped, suddenly aware of what she'd nearly revealed. "Before what?" Brock asked, his eyes more alert now despite his weakened state. Madeline took a deep breath. After nearly losing him, pretense seemed pointless. "Before I could tell you how much you've come to mean to me." His hand tightened around hers. "Madeline," he said, his voice strengthening, "when I was lying there after being shot, thinking I might die, I had only one regret." "What was that?" she whispered. "That I hadn't told you I love you." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. Madeline felt tears spring to her eyes again, but these were different from the earlier ones. "I love you too," she said, the words both frightening and liberating. "I think I have since you stood in that street and refused to let those women be sold." Despite his weakness, Brock raised himself slightly. "Come here," he said softly. Madeline leaned closer, and his hand gently cupped her cheek. Their lips met in a kiss that was tender yet filled with the emotion they'd both held in check for so long. When they parted, Brock smiled tiredly. "Worth getting shot for." "Don't you dare say that," she scolded, but couldn't help smiling in return. He settled back against the pillows, still holding her hand. "Will you marry me, Madeline Hayes?" The sudden proposal startled her. "You're delirious from blood loss," she protested. "Probably," he agreed with a weak chuckle. "But I've been wanting to ask for weeks. Nearly dying just made it more urgent." His blue eyes held hers. "I'm not offering you an easy life. Being a lawman's wife is difficult, but I promise to love you every day I'm given on this earth." Madeline thought of the proper courtship she'd expected back east, the conventional path she'd once imagined for herself. This was nothing like that, wild and unpredictable, passionate and real. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll marry you, Brock Lawson." His smile was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Good," he murmured as his eyes began to close again, "because I don't think I could bear to lose you now." As Brock drifted back to sleep, Madeline sat beside him, her heart full of both joy and fear. Loving him would never be safe or predictable, but she knew with absolute certainty that it was the path she was meant to follow. Over the next few weeks, Brock recovered under the combined care of Dr. Miller and Madeline, who visited him each day after school. Their engagement became the talk of Redemption Creek, with most townspeople expressing delight at the match, though a few young men grumbled about the sheriff capturing the pretty new teacher before they'd had a proper chance. By early December, Brock had returned to light duties at the sheriff's office, though Madeline insisted he continue to rest in the evenings. They often sat together by the fire at Mrs. Tillman's boarding house, planning their future while the widow pretended not to eavesdrop from her rocking chair. Spring would be a lovely time for a wedding, Madeline said one such evening as snow fell gently outside the windows. Brock took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I was thinking Christmas." She looked up in surprise. "Christmas, that's less than 3 weeks away." "I nearly died, Madeline. It changes how a man thinks about time." His eyes were earnest. "I don't want to wait months to make you my wife." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "People will talk," she said weakly. "They'll say it's rushed. Let them talk." He leaned closer. "Unless you truly want a spring wedding, I'll wait if it's important to you." Madeline considered the conventional path versus what her heart wanted. "Christmas," she decided with a smile, "but only if Mrs. Tillman will help me sew a proper wedding dress." "Child, I've been planning your wedding dress since the first time I saw the sheriff lingering at your door," called the widow from her corner, causing them both to laugh. The wedding preparations became a town project. The women gathered for sewing circles to help with Madeline's dress, while the men constructed furniture for the small house Brock owned at the edge of town, a house Madeline had yet to visit. As propriety demanded, they maintained separate residences until the wedding. A week before Christmas, as Madeline was decorating the schoolhouse for the holiday pageant, Brock arrived with an unexpected visitor, a distinguished older gentleman in Eastern clothes. "Madeline," Brock said, a strange tension in his voice, "this is Judge Richard Wilson from Denver. He's here about what happened when you first arrived." Madeline felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December air. "The auction?" she asked quietly. The judge nodded gravely. "Yes, Miss Hayes. We've captured the ringleader of the trafficking operation, but to convict him, we need testimony from the women who were taken. You're the only one still in the territory. The trial is in Denver, starting January 3rd, Brock added, his expression troubled. They want you to testify." Madeline sank onto a bench, memories of that terrible day flooding back. "I see," she said faintly. "Your testimony could put these men away for good," Judge Wilson explained, "prevent them from harming other women." Looking up at Brock, she saw both concern and pride in his eyes. He would support whatever she decided, she knew. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "Those men should face justice for what they did." The judge nodded appreciatively. "Excellent. The trial may last several weeks. You should prepare to be in Denver at least through January." After he left, Brock sat beside her, taking both her hands in his. "We can postpone the wedding," he said gently. "Wait until you return from Denver." "No," Madeline said, determination replacing her initial fear. "I won't let those men disrupt our lives any more than they already have. We'll marry on Christmas as planned and then face this trial together." Brock's expression was a mixture of love and admiration. "Together," he agreed. "Always." Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and a sky full of stars. The small church in Redemption Creek was decorated with evergreen boughs and candles, filled to capacity with townspeople and ranching families from the surrounding area. At the altar stood Brock, uncharacteristically nervous in a new black suit, his badge polished to a shine on his chest. When Madeline entered on the arm of Mayor Winston, who had offered to give her away in the absence of her father, a hush fell over the congregation. Her dress, the collaborative creation of Redemption Creek's women, was a masterpiece of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her auburn hair was arranged in soft curls beneath a simple veil, and she carried a bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers. But it was her radiant smile as she locked eyes with Brock that truly captivated everyone present. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When they exchanged vows, Brock's strong voice carried clearly through the church. "I promise to protect you, to respect you, to cherish you all the days of my life." Madeline's response was equally firm. "I promise to stand beside you, to support you, to love you through whatever challenges we may face." As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Brock gathered her into his arms for a kiss that drew appreciative cheers from the congregation. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Lawson, Madeline felt a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. The celebration continued at the town hall, transformed for the occasion with decorations and tables laden with food contributed by every family. There was dancing to fiddle music, laughter, and so many good wishes that Madeline felt overwhelmed by the community's embrace. "Are you happy, Mrs. Lawson?" Brock asked as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied truthfully. "Though I'm a bit nervous about tomorrow." Tomorrow, they would travel to their home, her first time seeing the place that would be theirs together. The thought of their wedding night brought a blush to her cheeks that Brock noticed with a gentle smile. "We have a lifetime ahead of us," he said softly. "No need to be nervous about anything." When they finally slipped away from the celebration, a wagon decorated with ribbons awaited to carry them to their home. The short journey through the snowy night was magical. Stars overhead and the warm weight of Brock's arm around her shoulders. The house, when they arrived, was lit with lanterns that friendly hands had placed in anticipation of their arrival. It was larger than Madeline had expected, a sturdy two-story structure with a broad porch. "Welcome home," Brock said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Inside, Madeline discovered a home already prepared for her arrival. The furniture was simple but well-crafted, with touches that spoke of care: curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed upstairs, a bookshelf filled with volumes. "Mrs. Tillman and the other ladies have been busy," Brock explained, seeing her surprise. "They wanted you to feel at home immediately." "It's wonderful," she said sincerely, exploring the rooms with growing delight. In the kitchen, she found a pot of stew keeping warm on the stove and fresh bread wrapped in a cloth, their wedding night supper. After they had eaten, sitting close together at the kitchen table, a comfortable silence fell between them. The reality of their new situation alone together as husband and wife created a sweet tension. "Would you like to see the rest of the house?" Brock asked finally, his voice slightly deeper than usual. Madeline nodded, allowing him to lead her through the downstairs rooms and then up the narrow staircase to the second floor. There were two bedrooms, one clearly intended as theirs with a large bed covered by the beautiful quilt she had noticed earlier, and a smaller room that Brock described as for the future. The implication brought another blush to her cheeks, but also a warm anticipation. Their children might someday fill this house with laughter. In their bedroom, a fire had been lit in the small hearth, casting a golden glow over the simple furnishings. Brock crossed to a bureau and retrieved a small package wrapped in brown paper. "A wedding gift," he said, presenting it to her. "Not much compared to what you deserve." Madeline unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When opened, it contained a tiny daguerreotype of Brock on one side, the other empty. "For your likeness," he explained. "So when I carry it, I'll have us both near my heart." Moved beyond words, Madeline reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I love you," she whispered. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "And I love you, Madeline Lawson." Their kiss began tenderly, but quickly deepened, months of restrained desire finally finding expression. As Brock's hands caressed her back, Madeline surrendered to the emotions she had kept carefully controlled during their courtship. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilt, the fire burning low in the hearth, Madeline rested her head on Brock's chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his fingers gently combing through her unbound hair. "That I never expected to find such happiness," she admitted. "When I left Philadelphia, I was seeking independence, a way to support myself. I never imagined finding love. And I never imagined finding someone who would accept both me and my dangerous profession." His arms tightened around her. "The Denver trial won't be easy for you." Madeline propped herself up to look at him. "I'm not afraid, not anymore. Those men took something from me, my sense of safety, my trust. By testifying, I take that power back." Pride shone in Brock's eyes. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known." Not brave, she corrected, settling back against him. Just determined, and no longer alone. New Year's Day found them on a train bound for Denver, the mountain scenery spectacular through the frosted windows. Madeline wore the locket Brock had given her, now containing a photograph of both of them taken hastily before their departure. The city, when they arrived, was imposing after the small-town simplicity of Redemption Creek tall buildings, crowded streets, and a bustling energy that reminded Madeline of the eastern cities she'd left behind. They stayed in a modest hotel near the courthouse, and the next day, Madeline met with the prosecutor to prepare for her testimony. Brock waited outside, unable to attend the preparation sessions but determined to support her however he could. When the trial began, Madeline found herself facing not only the main defendant, a well-dressed man named Harrison, who looked more like a banker than a criminal, but also the surviving members of the gang who had attempted to auction her and the other women. Taking the witness stand, she felt a momentary panic as all eyes turned to her. Then she caught sight of Brock sitting in the back of the courtroom, his steady gaze giving her courage. Drawing a deep breath, she began to recount her ordeal in a clear, unwavering voice. For 3 days, she testified and endured aggressive cross-examination from the defense attorneys who tried to suggest she had willingly participated in some kind of theatrical performance rather than a genuine auction. And why would I do such a thing? She asked sharply when the insinuation was made. I came west to teach, not to participate in degrading charades. Each evening, Brock held her as she released the emotions she'd controlled so carefully in the courtroom. You're doing beautifully, he assured her. Every person in that jury can see your honesty. On the 4th day, as Madeline left the courthouse after completing her testimony, a woman approached her hesitantly. She recognized her as one of the other captives from that day, Sarah, a young widow who had been seeking work as a housekeeper. Mrs. Lawson, Sarah said softly, I wanted to thank you. I couldn't face them myself. My family back east would. Her voice broke. Madeline took her hands. You have nothing to be ashamed of. We were victims, not willing participants. Your husband seems like a good man, Sarah said, glancing at Brock, who waited a respectful distance away. You were fortunate. Yes, Madeline agreed, but not all men are like those who took us. There are good men in this world, men of honor. After 2 weeks of testimony from multiple witnesses, the jury retired to consider their verdict. Madeline and Brock spent the tense waiting period exploring Denver, trying to distract themselves from the uncertainty of the outcome. On a cold January afternoon, word came that the jury had reached a decision. They returned to the packed courthouse, Brock's hand steady on Madeline's back as they found seats. When the verdict was read guilty on all counts, a collective sigh seemed to sweep through the room. Harrison and his associates would face many years in territorial prison for their crimes. Outside the courthouse, as snowflakes swirled in the winter air, Brock pulled Madeline into a tight embrace. It's over, he murmured against her hair. You did it. We did it, she corrected, looking up at him with shining eyes. I couldn't have faced this without you. The train journey back to Redemption Creek felt like a homecoming in the truest sense. As the familiar mountains came into view, Madeline felt the weight of the trial finally lifting from her shoulders. What are you thinking about? Brock asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. About how strangely life unfolds, she replied. If those men hadn't taken me, I might never have met you. I prefer to think we would have found each other somehow, he said, taking her hand. Some things are meant to be. Upon their return, Redemption Creek welcomed them as conquering heroes. The story of the trial and conviction had reached the town via telegraph, and a small crowd gathered at the station to greet them. Life gradually settled into new patterns. Madeline returned to her teaching, now living in the house at the edge of town with Brock. Each morning, they shared breakfast before going their separate ways, she to the schoolhouse, he to the sheriff's office. Each evening, they reunited to share the events of their day. Spring arrived, melting the snow and bringing new growth to the valley. On a warm Saturday in April, Brock suggested they ride to the ridge where they had first begun to acknowledge their feelings for each other. The meadow was carpeted with wildflowers, as they spread a blanket beneath a young aspen tree. Madeline leaned back against Brock's chest as they looked out over the valley, his arms encircling her waist. "I have something to tell you," she said after a comfortable silence. "Something I've suspected for a few weeks now." Brock's arms tightened slightly. "What is it?" Madeline turned in his embrace to face him, taking his hands and placing them gently on her still flat stomach. "That second bedroom won't be empty much longer." His expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the space of heartbeats. "A baby, you're sure?" She nodded, laughing as he gathered her into a fierce but gentle embrace. "When?" he asked, pulling back to look at her with such love that it made her heart ache. "November, Dr. Miller thinks," Madeline smiled. "A year after you proposed." Brock placed his hand reverently on her abdomen. "I'll be a father," he said, his voice filled with amazement and a touch of trepidation. "You'll be a wonderful father," she assured him. "As wonderful as you are a husband." They spent the afternoon in the meadow, making plans and dreaming of the future, a future neither of them could have imagined when fate first brought them together on that terrible day at the auction. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Brock helped Madeline to her feet. "We should head back before it gets dark." Standing beside the horses, he pulled her close for one more kiss. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For giving me a life fuller than I ever thought possible, for being brave enough to stay in Redemption Creek despite how your journey here began." His hand rested protectively over their unborn child. "For this family we're creating together." Madeline smiled up at him, this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "We saved each other, I think." As they rode home side by side, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and amber, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terrifying beginning at the auction to the hard-won happiness she now possessed, every step had led her here to this man, this love, this life. And as Redemption Creek came into view in the distance, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. In the years that followed, the Lawson family grew and flourished. Their daughter Emma arrived in November as predicted, followed 2 years later by a son they named James after Madeline's father. The small house at the edge of town expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Brock adding rooms as needed with the help of friends and neighbors. Madeline continued teaching until Emma was born, then took a few years away from the schoolhouse to focus on her children. When James turned 3, she returned to teaching part-time, finding a balance between her passion for education and her devotion to her family. Brock served as sheriff for 15 more years, before finally accepting a position as a judge for the county, a role that kept him closer to home and out of direct danger, much to Madeline's relief. Their home became a gathering place for the community, known for its open door and warm welcome to travelers, newcomers, and anyone in need. On quiet evenings, they would often sit together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. Sometimes, Brock would remind them of how they met, of his words on that fateful day. "Not today, not ever again." It had become a family motto of sorts, a reminder that standing up for what was right could change not just one life but many. And on special occasions, Madeline would open the silver locket she still wore now, containing tiny photographs of their entire family, and remember the journey that had brought them all together. A journey that began with fear, but led to a love stronger than she had ever dared to imagine.